think back 10 years. Are you fundamentally the same person who existed then? Maybe your opinions have done a 180, your hobbies are unrecognizable, and physically, well, you're practically a brand new collection of cells.
Right.
So what's the enduring you in all that change?
That's the age-old riddle of personal identity we're tackling today. What makes you the same individual despite the constant flow of time and, well, transformation?
Yeah.
We'll be drawing from philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience to dissect how this sense of self persists or sometimes doesn't.
Right. And this isn't just some academic head-scratcher. It hits us where we live. It shapes how we understand responsibility for past actions, how we grapple with ethical choices, and even how we find our place in the world.
Exactly. Consider the classic Ship of Theseus. If you replace every single part of a ship over time, is it still the same ship?
Right, the old paradox.
That simple analogy encapsulates the core of our puzzle.
Yeah.
How can something remain the same when its very components are in constant flux? Our goal today is to navigate these ideas and pull out the most illuminating insights.
Okay, so where do we even begin to unravel this knotty problem?
Well, a natural starting point is the bedrock of ideas. The major philosophical theories that have tried to pin down personal identity throughout history.
All right, let's jump in with what feels like the most obvious answer. Bodily continuity. It's the straightforward notion that if you have the same physical body persisting through time, that's what makes you the same person.
Seems simple enough.
I mean, legally speaking, that's often the bottom line, right? Fingerprints, DNA, they all point to the same biological entity.
That's the intuitive appeal of what's sometimes called body theory or animalism. The core argument is that as long as your living biological organism continues to exist, so do you.
Even if your thoughts change completely.
Yeah, even significant psychological shifts don't negate that fundamental physical connection, according to this view.
But here's a twist. Our bodies are in constant turnover at a cellular level. After enough time, you're practically made of entirely new stuff. So is it really the same body in a meaningful sense?
That's the central challenge. And this is where thought experiments become incredibly useful.
Yes. Philosophy's playground.
Exactly. Take Derek Parfit's teleportation idea. You step into a booth, a machine scans your complete physical and mental makeup, destroys your original body.
Whoa, destroys it.
Yeah, that's key. And instantly recreates an exact replica on Mars. That person on Mars has all your memories, your personality, everything. Is that person you?
Even though it's a completely new physical body.
A new collection of atoms, arranged identically.
That's a real mind bender.
Yeah.
My gut reaction is, yeah, it feels like it's still me. It has all my inner world.
Right.
But the original me is gone, obliterated.
Right.
It really makes you question if the physical body is the absolute bedrock of identity.
Exactly. Parfit used this to suggest that perhaps what we intuitively consider har-has lies beyond the specific collection of atoms we're made of at any given moment.
So maybe it's the pattern, not the stuff.
The teleportation scenario hints that psychological continuity might be a more fundamental aspect of our sense of self.
Okay, so maybe it's not just the body. What about the concept of a soul?
The soul theory.
This idea of an unchanging immaterial essence that defines who we truly are pops up in so many spiritual traditions.
The soul theory proposes that personal identity is rooted in an indivisible spiritual substance, the soul or mind. This core essence persists even as our physical bodies and mental states undergo change.
So it connects to mind-body dualism, the idea that mind and body are separate things.
Precisely. It aligns with that view. If you are your soul and that soul remains constant, then your identity endures, unchanging.
Philosophers like Descartes famously viewed the self as a thinking soul, right?
He did, the I think, therefore I am.
And Locke had that thought experiment where a prince's soul ends up in a cobbler's body.
Yes, suggesting the person goes with the soul, not the body.
So what are the problems with this view? It sounds neat.
Well, the soul theory faces some significant hurdles when we try to examine it critically. Like, how do we detect or measure something immaterial like a soul?
You can't, really.
By its very definition, it's beyond empirical observation. This lack of verifiable evidence makes it difficult to analyze scientifically.
Wow.
Furthermore, even if souls exist, how do we know they remain unchanged? Could souls themselves evolve or be altered?
Good point.
It often feels like, naming the mystery rather than providing a concrete explanation.
That makes sense. It's a powerful idea for many, but tough to grapple with in a concrete way. So if it's not just the body or the soul, let's look at something that feels more within our grasp, our minds, our memories, our personalities.
Right.
This is where John Locke's groundbreaking ideas come into play, isn't it?
Absolutely. Locke's psychological continuity theory is hugely influential. He argued that personal identity is founded on the continuity of consciousness, and particularly on memory.
So memory is the key for Locke.
For Locke, you are the same person as a past self if you can remember that self's thoughts and experiences. Your identity, in his view, extends only as far back as your conscious recollection.
That really resonates with our intuitive understanding.
Yeah.
We often tie our sense of self to our life story as it's stored in our memories.
Definitely.
When someone experiences significant memory loss, we often say they're not the same person anymore. Alzheimer's is a poignant real-world example of this very worry.
Exactly. It seems to hit at the core of who someone is. However, Locke's theory isn't without its challenges.
Like what?
Well, memory is notoriously unreliable. We forget vast stretches of our early lives, we misremember things,
Sure.
and we certainly have no conscious recollection of being asleep or in a coma. Does that mean we blink in and out of personhood every night?
Huh. That seems counterintuitive.
Right? We wake up assuming we're still us. And then there's the tricky problem of transitivity that Thomas Reid pointed out.
Transitivity, what's that?
Imagine a general who remembers being an officer, and that officer remembers being a child. Following Locke strictly, if the general doesn't directly remember being the child, does that mean the general and the child aren't the same person?
That feels wrong. They're linked through the officer stage.
Exactly. It breaks the chain of identity if you rely solely on direct memory links. Those are key limitations.
So how have people tried to fix Locke's idea?
Modern interpretations of psychological continuity have expanded beyond just episodic memory remembering specific events.
Okay.
They include the ongoing persistence of personality traits, beliefs, values, intentions, essentially, the overall, a continuous flow of our mental life.
So like the psychological connections more broadly.
Yes. As long as there's a relatively unbroken stream of these psychological characteristics, the same person is considered to persist. Overlapping chains, you could say.
This leads us to Derek Parfit's more radical notions about identity, right?
Oh, absolutely.
He talked about these overlapping chains of psychological connection.
Yeah.
And the idea that identity might not be this strict one-to-one relationship.
Exactly. Strict identity might be too rigid.
His brain-splitting thought experiments really threw a curveball at the traditional view.
They certainly did. Parfit imagines scenarios where a person's brain is surgically divided, and each hemisphere, containing a full set of memories and personality, is transplanted into a new body.
Okay, wow.
Suddenly, you have two individuals who are psychologically continuous with the original person. Which one is you?
Both. Neither. One.
Parfit argued that in such cases, it's less about strict numerical identity, are you person A or person B, and more about the degree of psychological connectedness and continuity.
So survival, not identity.
In a sense, yes.
Yeah.
What matters is that your psychology continues, your mental life can branch, and the question of which one is really you becomes less meaningful.
Like a single river splitting into two streams, both have the same source.
That's a great analogy. He pushes us to think beyond a simple same or different answer.
That's truly mind-bending. So if our mental patterns could be transferred, say, to a computer, the psychological view suggests some form of us could continue. But conversely, if those core mental features were to drastically change, even if our physical body remained intact, it might feel like the original us has vanished.
Precisely. The focus shifts from the physical container to the psychological content and its continuity. Now, let's pivot to a completely different way of thinking about this, the bundle theory.
Okay.
This perspective suggests there's no fixed, enduring self behind our stream of experiences at all.
Wait, no self. Okay, this is where it gets a bit more abstract. Unpack that for me.
Think of the philosopher David Hume. When he looked inward, trying to pinpoint this core self, all he ever encountered was a fleeting series of perceptions, a thought, an emotion, a sensation.
He couldn't find the thinker.
He never found a constant I that existed separately from these passing experiences. His conclusion was that a person is nothing more than a bundle or collection of these constantly changing perceptions.
Just the perceptions themselves bundled together.
Exactly. There's no underlying soul or ego holding them together.
So the feeling of being a unified self is almost like an illusion created by the continuous flow of these perceptions.
Pretty much.
Hume famously compared it to a theater where different acts play out, or a commonwealth constantly in flux.
Exactly. The sense of unity we experience is a result of our minds habitually associating these successive perceptions. It's a mental habit.
Is this similar to Buddhist ideas?
Very much so. The Buddhist doctrine of anatta, or no self, proposes that what we commonly refer to as self is just a continuous process, not a permanent entity.
So any feeling of an enduring identity is a useful fiction created by the brain.
That's the idea, a convenient label for a constantly changing process.
If the bundle theory holds, then the question of what makes us the same person over time is almost like asking what makes a flame the same flame.
Ooh, good analogy.
It's constantly composed of different molecules, different heat, different light.
Right. Identity becomes more about recognizing a pattern or a narrative than identifying a fixed thing. It's a matter of convention, perhaps.
But what about the feeling? Even if it's just a bundle, it feels like a unified I. Why?
That's a key pushback. Bundle theorists often respond that the brain is simply wired to create this moment-to-moment continuity. Our cognitive mechanisms weave these perceptions together smoothly.
So the brain generates the feeling of unity.
Yes, there's no deeper central self orchestrating it. According to this view, it's an emergent property of the system.
Interesting. No stable self, just a perpetually updating collection of experiences. Now let's move to a perspective that feels a bit more connected to our lived experience. Narrative identity.
Right. This one often resonates more intuitively.
This is the idea that our identity is essentially the ongoing story we tell ourselves about who we are.
Precisely. Narrative identity theory proposes that we construct an internal life story that weaves together our past, present, and anticipated future into a coherent whole.
Like an autobiography we're constantly writing in our heads.
Exactly. We are, in essence, the authors and protagonists of our own constantly evolving autobiographies. This personal narrative provides us with a sense of unity, purpose, and meaning across time.
Philosophers like McIntyre and Ricoeur and the psychologist Dan McAdams have significantly contributed to this idea, right?
They have. McAdams talks about this internalized story having recurring themes and core values that evolve as we navigate life's events.
Like chapters in the story.
Exactly, which then become chapters in our ongoing narrative.
What's powerful about narrative identity is that it doesn't necessarily require an unchanging underlying substance, like a soul, or even perfectly accurate memories to remain consistent.
Right, that's a key point. What matters is our ability to make sense of the changes and experiences as part of a single, unfolding story.
So interpretation is key.
Yes. Our autobiographical memories, even if flawed or incomplete, are the raw material we use to weave this narrative that explains who we are to ourselves and to the world. It's an active and ongoing process of self-interpretation and creation.
And Daniel Dennett offers this compelling analogy of the self as a center of narrative gravity, like a fictional character we construct.
I like that one.
It's not a tangible thing located in a specific part of the brain, but rather a useful abstract point that helps organize our experiences and actions.
Precisely. Dennett suggests that this self is a kind of useful fiction that our brains automatically spin to help us make sense of the world and our place in it.
A useful fiction, but a powerful one.
Absolutely. This narrative has a very real power to shape our behavior and give our lives meaning, but it also implies that our sense of self can evolve and even change dramatically as our life story is revised.
So philosophy gives us all these different angles: body, soul, mind, no self, and story. It feels like each one captures a facet of this complex puzzle.
It really does. None seems to have the complete answer on its own.
Now let's turn to what science, particularly neuroscience, can tell us about how the brain and memory contribute to our sense of self.
Absolutely. While philosophers have explored these concepts through thought experiments and introspection, neuroscience allows us to observe what happens in the brain during shifts in our sense of identity.
And what's the big takeaway?
Well, one thing is abundantly clear. Memory plays a pivotal role.
Back to Locke, in a way.
In a way, yes. As one neuroscientist put it, memory is the very glue that holds together our core identity. Our brains are constantly recalibrating based on new experiences, and memory is central to this ongoing process of reassembling our sense of self each day.
We often intuitively feel that our memories are fundamental to who we are. And it sounds like science is confirming that.
It certainly seems to underpin much of it.
You mentioned the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, the vmPFC. What's its specific role in all this?
Ah, yes. Research, including a notable 2021 study, has shown that the vmPFC is critically involved in linking our current sense of self with our past experiences and our envisioned future.
So connect the dots across time.
Essentially, yes. Damage to this brain region can lead to a diminished sense of self-continuity across time. This suggests that the brain actively works to construct and maintain a cohesive model of who we are across our lifespan.
And there's the well-established self-reference effect, right? We tend to remember information that's related to ourselves much more easily than other information.
We certainly do. And brain imaging studies consistently show increased activity in the medial prefrontal cortex when we're thinking about ourselves. It's as if the brain tags me information as particularly important.
Special processing for self stuff.
Precisely. Now, to truly grasp the profound impact of memory on identity, consider the devastating cases of severe amnesia. The case of Clive's wearing is particularly poignant. Due to extensive brain damage from encephalitis, he is unable to form new memories, and his recall of the past is severely fragmented.
What's that like for him?
He essentially lives in a perpetual present, constantly feeling as though he has just regained consciousness. His repeated journal entries stating, "I am awake for the first time. Every few minutes are heartbreaking."
Wow. Every few minutes. Living entirely in the present moment with no real connection to the past.
His wife described it as if every waking instant was a completely fresh experience.
That really underscores how crucial the continuity of memory is for a continuous sense of self.
It absolutely does.
Even though Clive retained some aspects of his personality, like his love for his wife and certain skills, like his musical ability.
Yes, some things remained.
The fundamental thread of his identity across time seems tragically broken.
It does. And the famous case of patient HM, Henry Molaison, who lost the ability to form new long-term memories after surgery for epilepsy, paints a similar picture of an individual profoundly stuck in time.
Unable to form new chapters in his life story.
Exactly. These real-world examples provide compelling evidence for Locke's insightful connection between the continuity of consciousness, largely mediated by memory, and our enduring sense of personal identity.
And specifically, autobiographical memory. Our personal history.
It appears that specifically our autobiographical memories and our ability to link moments in our personal history are vital for this continuous feeling of I.
Okay, so memory is clearly a cornerstone. But what about our personality? We tend to think of our core personality traits as being relatively stable throughout our adult lives.
The big 5 traits, for example.
But we also know we evolve and change over time. What does psychology tell us about the stability of personality and its connection to our identity?
Psychology suggests that while our basic personality traits do tend to exhibit a degree of stability in adulthood, maybe a correlation around 0.5 over a decade, which is moderate.
So, recognizable but not identical.
Exactly. They are by no means immutable. Gradual shifts and adaptations are a normal part of life.
But major life events can really be transformative, right?
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Trauma, significant life transitions. People often express feeling like a different person after going through something profound.
Absolutely. Think about post-traumatic growth.
Right.
Intense and significant experiences, particularly those that are emotionally charged, can lead to lasting changes in our behavior, our beliefs, and how we perceive ourselves.
Why do negative experiences seem to have such a big impact sometimes?
Well, our brains are often wired to prioritize learning from and adapting to challenging or threatening events. It's a survival mechanism in part, but this can lead to noticeable shifts in personality.
Which raises a fascinating question. If someone's core personality undergoes a drastic transformation, at what point might we consider them to be, well, a different person?
It's a very blurry line. The often cited example is Phineas Gage.
Ah, the railroad worker.
Yes, the 19th century railroad worker who survived having an iron rod driven through his skull, specifically his frontal lobe.
Incredible survival.
Miraculous. But while he lived, accounts suggest a dramatic shift in his personality from a dependable and well-liked foreman to someone who was reportedly irreverent, impulsive, and profane.
And people who knew him well famously said he was no longer Gage.
That quote really sticks. It highlights how closely we link personality, especially things like social judgment and impulse control, often associated with the frontal lobes, to our sense of self.
And this isn't just historical anecdote, right? Modern neuroscience sees similar things.
Sadly, yes. We see personality changes resulting from brain injury or neurodegenerative diseases like frontotemporal dementia, where loved ones often express that the person they know isn't themselves anymore. It strongly suggests that our psychological characteristics are deeply intertwined with our sense of who we are.
Now, let's delve into one of the most peculiar areas, split brain cases.
Always fascinating.
When the neural pathways connecting the two hemispheres of the brain are severed, usually for severe epilepsy.
Right, cutting the corpus callosum?
It can lead to some truly remarkable phenomena, hinting at a potential fragmentation of consciousness.
These cases have revealed that each hemisphere of the brain can function independently in certain controlled experimental settings. Researchers like Sperry and Gazzaniga showed that each side can perceive, process, and even act on information without the other side being consciously aware.
Like two minds in one head.
It's almost as if there are two separate streams of awareness existing within a single skull, at least under specific test conditions.
That's incredible. The classic experiments where a patient's left hand might select an object related to a word shown only to the right brain, but this speaking left hemisphere denies ever seeing the word.
Yes. And the left brain often confabulates, makes up a plausible reason for the left hand's action.
It's like something straight out of science fiction. Does this imply that there are, in some sense, two persons residing within one body in these cases?
That's the profound question about the nature of identity that these cases force us to confront. Under normal circumstances, the two hemispheres communicate constantly, leading to our subjective experience of a unified self.
The feeling of being one me.
Right. But when that communication is significantly disrupted, it appears that this unity of consciousness can, at least in certain experimental contexts, break down.
But do the patients feel like two people?
Generally, no. In everyday life, they still report feeling like a single individual. The left hemisphere, which usually controls language, seems particularly adept at creating a coherent narrative, weaving together information from both sides into a single story, even if it has to invent parts.
The interpreter module, Gazzaniga called it.
Exactly. But the potential for division is there.
And Parfit famously used these split-brain scenarios to construct some truly mind-bending thought experiments.
He really ran with it.
Particularly the idea of transplanting each brain hemisphere into a different new body.
Right. Now you'd have two individuals, each possessing half of the original brain, but seemingly with the complete memories and personality of the original person.
So which one, if either, is truly you? Or are both? Or perhaps neither?
Exactly. Parfit argued that such branching scenarios reveal the limitations of our traditional all-or-nothing concept of personal identity. He suggested that what truly matters is the continuation of our psychology, our memories, beliefs, personality traits.
Psychological continuity again.
Yes, even if that continuation occurs in multiple individuals. In such cases, the question of which one is really you becomes less important than recognizing the continuation of your mental life in different forms. Survival matters more than strict identity.
It fundamentally challenges our ingrained notion of a singular, indivisible self. Think back to our river analogy now. It's as if the river has not just split, but each new stream has carved its own distinct path.
A very apt image. It certainly does challenge those assumptions. It makes you wonder if our everyday sense of a single, unified self is more of a functional construct of our brain.
A useful story the interpreter tells.
Well, an absolute fundamental reality.
Now, let's turn to a more sobering but equally relevant area. The question of identity in the context of Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia.
A deeply important and difficult topic.
This is where the gradual erosion of memory and cognitive function seems to directly and tragically impact our sense of who someone is.
Tragically, these neurodegenerative diseases do progressively erode a person's memories, cognitive abilities, and even aspects of their personality.
Leading to that heart-wrenching feeling from loved ones that the person they once knew is slowly slipping away.
Exactly. The deeply moving quotes you often hear from family members, and sometimes even from individuals in the early stages of the disease, about no longer feeling like the same person.
It really hits home.
It underscores Locke's emphasis on memory as being central to our sense of self.
It's profoundly difficult to witness.
Yeah.
But you mentioned some fascinating research that offers a more nuanced perspective.
Yes, thankfully.
Looking at which specific types of losses most significantly impact our judgments about whether someone is still the same person.
That's right. A compelling 2014 study by Stromaner and Nichols yielded a really surprising result.
What did they find?
They found that changes in an individual's moral character were actually more impactful on whether observers judged them to be no longer the same person than even significant memory loss.
Wow, morality trumped memory. That's startling.
It was a startling result. This research suggests that our everyday understanding of a person's true self is deeply intertwined with their moral and social capacities, their kindness, honesty, empathy.
That's really unexpected. How does this relate to our understanding of dementia then?
Well, interestingly, other research, like work by Zaitchik, indicates that some core moral and social abilities,
Like what?
like basic theory of mind, the ability to understand others' mental states and fundamental moral judgment, can remain relatively intact in many individuals with Alzheimer's disease, even as their memory and reasoning abilities decline.
So they might not remember your name, but they still know right from wrong.
Often, yes. For example, someone might not remember making a promise, but they can often still judge whether breaking a promise, in general, is wrong, or recognize basic fairness.
That's actually a comforting thought.
It is, isn't it?
That even as Alzheimer's takes away so many memories, some fundamental aspects of who a person is, like their basic moral compass or their capacity for empathy, might endure.
Right. It suggests that perhaps personal identity is more than just our accumulated past experiences or cognitive function.
It's not just memory.
Precisely. It points to the idea that personal identity is likely a cluster of interconnected processes. Memory, yes, but also psychological continuity in a broader sense, our moral character, our physical presence, and the narrative we construct.
A multifaceted thing.
Exactly. Disruptions to any of these can have significant effects, but threads of continuity often remain, which helps explain why the philosophical debate about the core of identity continues. There's no single silver bullet.
Okay, so we've explored a wide range of philosophical theories and scientific findings. Now, let's try to ground this in some tangible, real-life examples and dilemmas that really put our understanding of personal identity to the test.
Good idea. Let's look at how these ideas play out. Consider individuals who undergo profound, life-altering events.
Like what?
People who survive traumatic experiences, undergo radical religious conversions, or experience near-death encounters often describe feeling like they were a different person back then.
I've heard people say that.
Think of a veteran grappling with PTSD who feels alienated from their pre-war self, or someone who has a transformative spiritual awakening and feels reborn.
While they have undoubtedly changed significantly, do we consider them to be literally a different person?
Usually, no. Usually we recognize them as the same underlying human being who has undergone significant transformation.
And it often gets integrated into a new narrative.
Exactly. A new chapter, perhaps a radically different one, but part of the same ongoing life story. It's when someone can't integrate the past, maybe due to severe dissociation, that identity confusion really arises.
And then there's the complex and often misunderstood phenomenon of dissociative identity disorder, previously known as multiple personality disorder.
Right, where one body seems to be associated with multiple distinct identities or alters.
Each with their own patterns of memory, behavior, and even physiological responses sometimes.
It's incredibly complex.
Are these truly separate persons sharing one body?
That's the big question. Legally and socially, the current framework generally treats an individual with DIE as a single person responsible for the actions of all alters, but their internal experience is often characterized by a lack of integration, distinct memories, and a feeling of being separate selves.
It feels like an extreme form of psychological fragmentation, almost a real-life manifestation of the split brain concept we discussed earlier.
It certainly raises profound questions about the unity of self. It's often linked to severe early trauma, seen as a coping mechanism where identity fragments. The goal of therapy is often reintegration into a more coherent sense of self.
Underscoring the importance of that integrated narrative and memory system for a stable sense of identity. Okay, what about legal identity and accountability?
The legal system seems to take a fairly pragmatic stance, doesn't it?
How so?
It generally ties legal continuity to the persistence of the same biological organism. Your legal identity sticks with your body.
So fingerprints, DNA, birth records, that's you, legally speaking.
Pretty much. You can't simply claim I'm a different person now to evade responsibility for actions committed in the past, even if your memory of those actions is gone or your personality has changed drastically.
So the law sides more with bodily continuity for practical reasons.
Largely, yes. Consider the thought experiment of a complete memory wipe. Philosophically, following Locke, you might argue the person is gone.
But legally?
Legally, you're still the same individual tied to that body and its history. The system prioritizes stable and verifiable methods of identification for maintaining social order and accountability.
Then we have things like name and gender changes. When someone undergoes a gender transition, they may present very differently to the world. But we generally recognize and respect that they are the same person, now living in a way that aligns more authentically with their internal sense of self.
Absolutely. This highlights that core identity runs much deeper than external markers or labels.
The underlying continuity remains.
Yes, the continuity of memories, established relationships, fundamental personality traits, even as some aspects evolve, and their capacity for agency remains. These transitions often represent a deeper alignment with their true identity, not the creation of a new one.
And ethically, it's paramount to recognize and respect this continuity.
Precisely. Which is why legal systems are increasingly adapting to facilitate changes in name and gender markers while acknowledging the individual's ongoing identity.
Narrative identity theory seems to handle this well, right?
Yeah.
It's a significant and affirming chapter in their ongoing life story.
Exactly. It makes sense within that framework.
And finally, let's touch on the often debated issue of criminal rehabilitation.
A really tough one.
If someone spends decades incarcerated and undergoes what appears to be a profound change in their character and values,
They seem genuinely remorseful, maybe devoted to good works.
the argument sometimes arises that they are, in a meaningful sense, not the same person who committed the original crime.
Right. So, should they still be held fully accountable under the law? Do they deserve the same punishment decided decades ago?
It's a deeply complex ethical dilemma. Legally, they are still the same individual who committed the crime.
No doubt about that in the eyes of the law.
However, the significant transformation in their personality and values over time raises questions about the purpose of punishment retribution versus rehabilitation and the potential for genuine change.
Bernard Williams had a thought experiment about offering a criminal a choice. A long prison sentence, or complete mind erasure and replacement with a virtuous personality. Which would you fear more?
Oof. Most would fear the erasure, suggesting we identify with the continuity, even if flawed.
It highlights the tension within our philosophy of law and ethics between the principle of responsibility tied to a past identity and the reality of significant personal change over time. Real life isn't usually that extreme, but the question remains.
These real-world examples really underscore just how multifaceted personal identity is and how different lenses, philosophical, legal, personal, can lead us to different conclusions.
Absolutely. Context matters hugely.
Now let's briefly consider some modern implications and ethical puzzles that are further challenging our understanding of what it means to be the same person. Cloning, for instance, a genetic duplicate. Same person.
From the perspective of personal identity, almost universally, the answer is no.
Why not? Same genes.
While a clone would share the same genetic makeup as the original, it would be a distinct individual with its own unique stream of consciousness, its own memories, its own experiences from the moment of its creation.
So it starts as a blank slate psychologically, even with the same DNA.
Essentially, yes. Genes alone do not determine personal identity. The crucial element of continuous consciousness and experience is absent. Cloning raises numerous ethical considerations, of course, but the clone would not be the original person.
Okay. What about the increasingly discussed concept of mind uploading?
Ah, the sci-fi staple that's becoming a serious philosophical topic.
The hypothetical transfer of our consciousness and mental contents to a computer or another substrate. That feels like the ultimate thought experiment when it comes to identity.
It certainly is. If all your memories, personality traits, and thought patterns could be accurately copied and transferred to a digital platform, would that digital entity be you?
Or would it merely be a highly sophisticated copy, like a perfect Xerox?
Exactly. This brings us back to the core questions we discussed with teleportation. Is identity fundamentally tied to our biological hardware, our wetware?
Or is it about the pattern of information that constitutes our minds? Psychological continuity taken to the extreme.
Right. And what if the original biological brain isn't destroyed in the process?
Then you could theoretically exist in two places simultaneously.
Potentially. Which raises all sorts of philosophical and ethical dilemmas about which one is the real you, or if the concept of a singular you still even applies. Parfit's branching idea again.
It definitely opens up a Pandora's box of questions. What would be the rights of a purely digital consciousness?
Could you ethically delete one?
What if multiple copies were made? Who owns your digital estate?
It really forces us to confront the very essence of what constitutes me.
What about more near-future technologies like advanced brain-computer interfaces or the potential for targeted memory editing? How might these impact our sense of identity?
These technologies, even without the complete transfer of consciousness, could have profound implications for our sense of self.
How so?
Brain-computer interfaces that directly alter our thoughts, moods, or behaviors, or the ability to selectively erase traumatic memories, or even implant false ones.
Like an eternal sunshine of the spotless mind.
Exactly. These would directly tinker with the very foundations of what we've discussed in terms of psychological continuity and narrative identity.
Memory editing, in particular, directly engages with Locke's core ideas about the link between memory and identity.
It absolutely does. It compels us to reconsider what continuity means when our personal histories can be intentionally altered or curated.
And just to reiterate, when we talk about gender transitions, it's a clear and important real-world example of how our understanding of identity is evolving.
Yes, it's crucial to be clear here.
Recognizing that a transgender individual remains the same person throughout their transition, deserving of full respect and the continuous recognition of their rights, underscores that identity is something far deeper and more fundamental than external presentation or assigned labels.
Exactly. Historical difficulties in legally recognizing gender transitions often stemmed from an incorrect assumption of a fundamental change in personhood.
Which we now understand is flawed.
Contemporary understandings rightly acknowledge that identity is intrinsic and that legal and social systems should adapt to affirm and reflect an individual's true identity, ensuring continuity of their rights and recognition.
Finally, let's briefly touch on the philosophical and ethical questions surrounding personhood at the very edges of life.
Right. When does personal identity begin and when does it truly end?
The complex debate surrounding the moral status of fetuses, infants, or individuals in persistent vegetative states often hinge on our definition of personhood and, by extension, personal identity.
Locke's definition of a person as a thinking, intelligent being capable of self-awareness has significant implications here. It suggests a potential distinction between being biologically human and being a person with a fully developed sense of identity and consciousness. By his definition, newborns or fetuses might not yet qualify as persons.
Which is obviously a very contentious point in many debates.
Extremely. And similarly, for individuals who have permanently lost consciousness. The legal definition of death in many jurisdictions as brain death, the irreversible cessation of all brain functions, reflects a similar underlying principle. The loss of the integrated mind equates to the loss of the person, even if the body can be biologically sustained.
It's a deeply complex and often intensely personal area of philosophical and ethical debate, this question of when personal identity truly begins and ends.
It really is, touching on our most fundamental values.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive, what would you say ultimately makes a person the same over time? After all this, is there an answer?
It's clear that there's no single, simple answer. If there were, philosophers wouldn't still be debating it so fiercely. The diverse perspectives we've explored, the importance of our physical body as an anchor, the psychological connections through memory and personality, our moral and social character, the personal narrative we construct, and even the bundle theory's questioning of a stable self, each offer crucial pieces of this enduring puzzle.
It feels like personal identity is this incredibly robust, yet also surprisingly fragile thing.
That's a great way to put it.
We navigate so many profound changes throughout our lives, physically, mentally, situationally, and still largely maintain a coherent sense of self.
Most of the time, yes. The continuity holds.
But then something like a brain injury, dementia, or even just a particularly thought-provoking philosophical argument can really shake that foundation.
Exactly. It shows the mechanisms holding it together and what happens when they're disrupted. And understanding the complexities of personal identity isn't just an abstract intellectual exercise.
No, it has real consequences.
It has profound implications for how we approach and care for individuals with neurodegenerative diseases, how we assign moral and legal responsibility for actions, how we think about future technologies that might impact our minds and bodies.
And maybe just basic empathy.
And perhaps most importantly, how we practice everyday empathy by recognizing the enduring personhood beneath surface-level changes in others, and even in ourselves.
So it's not about every single detail of us remaining static, because clearly it doesn't.
Oh no, that's impossible.
It's more about this intricate and constantly evolving network of overlapping connections, our lived physical body, our accumulated experiences woven into memories, our character, and our ongoing ability to make sense of our life's journey through narrative.
Precisely. Personal identity over time is perhaps best understood not as a fixed entity, but as a dynamic process like that complex tapestry woven from countless threads you mentioned earlier. No single thread is unbreakable, perhaps, but the intricate intertwining of them provides a remarkable degree of resilience and continuity. You are the same person you were 10 years ago, not because every single aspect of you is identical.
Because it definitely isn't.
But because there's a continuous, albeit evolving, story and a web of connections that links who you are now to who you were then.
So perhaps our lives are all a bit like our own personal Ship of Theseus, constantly being rebuilt and changing, plank by plank. Maybe even the nameplate gets polished or changed, yet still carrying the same name, representing the same ongoing journey.
I like that.
Maybe the truest sense of self isn't just a snapshot in time, but the entire voyage itself.
A beautifully insightful way to frame it. Something for you, the listener, to continue to consider as you navigate your own unique and ever-evolving journey of self.